So let's get started. We begin our program this morning with the fitting title in regard to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta, Live and Let Die. The Bay Delta has held over 90 alternative solutions proposed since the early 1940s. Yes, there have been issues there that long. Currently, comments are being accepted for the current proposal to address both water reliability as well as ecosystem restoration, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, also known as BDCP. Live and Let Die features another proposal that Congressman John Garamendi would like us to consider. But just like the chips on your table, there is another side. We are pleased to welcome back Paul Helliker, Deputy Director of the Delta and Statewide Water Management, to share another perspective. Congressman John Garamendi joined the U.S. House of Representatives on November 5, 2009. He brings nearly 4 decades of public service to the House, Armed Services, Transportation and Infrastructure, and agricultural communities. He has been a tireless proponent of job creation, quality and affordable health care, education, environmental protection, and scientific research, while always working to ensure the stability and success of the state he has always called home. As California's 46th Lieutenant Governor, Garamendi was chair of the Commission for Economic Development, which he transformed this important body into a powerhouse to advocate for workforce development, vocational education, and research. As a regent of the University of California and trustee for the California State University System, Garamendi fought to hold the line on student fee increases and excessive administrative salaries. As chair of the California State Lands Commission, he led the fight against new offshore drilling. Paul Helliker was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown in October 2012 to the position of Deputy Director, Delta and Statewide Water Management. In that role, Paul oversees the Department of Water Resources Bay Delta Office, Flood Safe, Environmental Stewardship, and in Statewide Resource Office, Division of Environmental Services, and Interstate Water Resources Manager. That's a lot. Paul has worked in environmental and resource management programs for over 26 years, with experience at the federal, state, and local levels. Prior to joining DWR, Paul served for 8 years as the general manager of the Marin Municipal Water District. MMW is the water supply agency for most of Marin County, with 190,000 customers in 10 cities and in unincorporated areas of the county. During his tenure at MMWD, Paul also was the chair of the Bay Area Water Agencies Coalition, composed of major wholesale and retail water supply agencies in the Bay Area. Chair of the Regional Water Management Group responsible for the Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, and chair of Region 1 of the Association of Water Agencies, as well as a member of the Board of Directors of ACWA. Paul holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in environmental engineering, all from the Stanford University. Paul is a registered civil engineer in California. So please help me welcome Congressman Garamendi and Paul Helliker to the stage.
Good morning. I was trying to figure out what movie that was from. I sat down at the table and picked up a deck of cards. And I'm wondering if we can deal a winning hand for California. I think we can. I think across the table is a hand held by the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation. That is the opening ante is somewhere over $300 million. And the ultimate bet is somewhere between $25 billion and $50 billion. The actual bet's not known. That's one hand. There's another hand that can be dealt, and I'd like to tell you about that hand. There are basically 5 cards in that hand. But before I go to those 5 cards, I want to comment on some of the insights that we really ought to take a look at. And they really come from this county. And that is how to use water and what to do. Water recycling, water replenishment, the use of the underground aquifers. I want to congratulate Orange County. You're well ahead of the rest of this state, and you are away to the future. Now, in Northern California, if they hear me say this, I might get run out or thrown out, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that's the Metropolitan Water District. You've also shown us an important card in the deck, and that is to prepare for the drought. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, you had about 300,000 acre-feet of storage. Today, you have over 3 million. And as severe as the drought is, it's anticipated that the Metropolitan Water District can survive this year and next year with the same drought. Be tight, be a lot of conservation. Now, for my friends in Northern California, they didn't bother to do that. So there are really 2 winning cards that are already on the table, and they've been laid down by Southern California, and good for you. Now, the deck also has another hand out there, the Department of Water Resources and the Central Valley Project hand. And as I said, they're willing to put somewhere between $25 and $50 billion on the table, betting that the BDCP and the twin tunnels will solve the problem. It's a losing bet because the twin tunnels do not create 1 gallon of new water. There is absolutely no money in that $25 to $50 billion for a simple single storage project anywhere. No money for the underground aquifers and conjunctive water management. No money at all for what is the second part of that project, which is to continue to use the Delta levees as a plumbing system to deliver water to the great pumps at Tracy. It is, in short, nonsense. There's no sense to it. Why in the world would anybody put that much of a bet on the table and not be able to meet the minimum requirement of providing the guarantee of water reliability? In this drought today, you could not operate the tunnels. They'd sit there. Somewhere $15 billion unable to be used. If you took $15 billion and you picked up the correct cards and you laid those cards on the table, let's do that. Conservation. The Department of Water Resources' own documents indicate that you could probably conserve industrial, agricultural, urban, 3 million acre-feet. That's new water. That's new water that could be available, and it would be maybe a couple $2 billion to do that. Let's lay another card on the table, and let's call it storage. Aquifers. Is there any money in the BDCP for that? No. But you put that card on the table, maybe for $1 billion, you could replenish the aquifers, or at least set up the plumbing systems and the control systems to replenish the aquifers in the Great Central Valley of California, and then to be able to use those aquifers in a conjunctive water management program, providing extraordinary safety, which is not available in much of the Central Valley today, but happens to be available in Orange County because of some thoughtful ideas that put in place years ago. Where are the reservoirs in the BDCP? None. Read the document. And you'll find that it says itself it cannot be operated at certain times of the year because there's no place to put the water, even though the water might be available. Is there money to build a new reservoir south of the delta? No. Is there money to rebuild the earthquake-threatened San Luis Dam? No. Is there money for Los Boqueros? Is there money for Temperance Flat? Is there money for any of the reservoirs, including the aquifers and surface storage reservoirs south of the delta? No, but the document itself says you may not be able to use it because there's no place to put the water. It's a demand-driven system, not a storage system. Is there any money for any of the storage north of the delta? No. Sites Reservoir, which I'm a major advocate of, no money. $3 billion. 1.9 million acre feet of storage, 500,000 acre feet of annual yield. No money at all. Raising Shasta, no money. So, lay the storage card on the table. Let's pick up, mention conservation. Let's talk about recycling. Is there any money in this $25 to $50 billion project for recycling? No, none. Yet, the Department of Water Resources and the agencies in Southern California indicate that for $1 billion, you can easily get 500,000 acre feet of water by recycling. And by the way, the fifth biggest river on the west coast of the Western Hemisphere is what? It's the sanitation facilities in California. Water taken 500 miles from the north from the Colorado River, used once, or cleaned, used once, cleaned to a higher standard in the day it arrives in Southern California and dumped in the ocean, over 3 million acre feet. No money in the BDCP for recycling. Yet, at least easy 500,000 acre feet in the next decade, and probably twice that if you got serious about it. And by the way, the aquifers in Southern California have a larger capacity than Shasta Reservoir, the biggest reservoir in California. Much of it not used because they're contaminated, but we have the technology to clean them, recycle, put it in, take it out, clean it. Not a nickel. Let's see, let's lay another card on the table, the Delta. $15 billion to build a plumbing system in the Delta that is an existential threat to the Delta. Large enough to carry 15,000 cubic feet per second. When the Sacramento River, on average, not on average, over a period of decades, has 6 months of the year, somewhere between 10 and 18,000 cubic feet of water flowing past Sacramento. The tunnels have a capacity of 15. I know you're only going to build 3 intakes, and that's 9,000. Something like Jerry Brown talked about in his first iteration. We're going to build a freeway but not use the lanes. We're going to build the tunnels and not use it. Politics, greed, and necessity. And you've created a system that will destroy the Delta. The largest estuary on the west coast of the Western Hemisphere, critical for economic purposes, critical for environmental purposes. You name the fish, they're there. But you've created an existential threat to it. You don't need to do it. The facility, the plan itself says it's a dual-use facility. And yet, in that proposal, there is not a nickel to be spent on the second part of that dual-use facility, which are the Delta levees themselves. You'll hear later today somebody talking about all the Delta levees are going to collapse in an earthquake. I'm a rancher. I've spent a lot of my time smelling what I'm about to say. That's not going to happen. Maybe 1 or 2 of the levees will collapse, and they certainly might if you don't spend any money maintaining the plumbing system that's been used for the last 60 years, that is the Delta levees. But yet, in the BDCP, there is no money for the maintenance of the levees. Yet they must be used under the proposal that's been put forth, that $25 to $50 billion proposal. What are they thinking? This is making no sense at all. In other words, nonsense. So, what are you going to do about the Delta? Well, first of all, you have to start slowly because you're dealing with a very delicate environmental system. The ecosystem is stressed, to be sure. So, repair the delta levees, perhaps $1 billion. The estimate by the Department of Water Resources themselves. Now you've got half of your plumbing system repaired and functional, able to withstand the earthquake and a significant sea level rise. Not the 15 feet that's potential, not the 3 meters, but somewhere in between, at least for the next 50 years. Unless that ice shelf in Antarctica really does collapse. Okay, so you secure the delta levees. You do some of the environmental. Don't take 145,000 acres of prime agricultural land out of production. Do some of it. Move slowly along. Let science drive this thing. Move it along. And then plan for a small facility. A 3,000 cubic foot per second facility could operate year-round, taking water out of the Sacramento River, I would suggest, at the Deepwater Channel, the Port of Sacramento, which, by the way, has 25 miles of canal already built and access to the Sacramento River already there. Run that facility across the Sacramento River or under the Sacramento River, under the San Joaquin River, dump it into the sloughs in the South Delta, or build a new canal and deliver it to the pumps. 2 million acre feet, readily available, virtually guaranteed year in and year out. And with the storage to the south, you've got a place to put it. That's the Delta card. Not a 9,000 cubic feet per second intake with the 15,000 cubic feet per second tunnel, 2 of them 40 feet in diameter, but a rational program. Far less. I don't know, put $3 billion, put $5 billion on that. Anybody keeping score here? We're probably not yet at $15 billion. And you've created a system that deals with the delta. You've created the storage. You've got the recycling programs. You've got the conservation programs in place, agricultural conservation, urban, industrial, for about $15 billion. How much do you want to invest in habitat? I don't know. Put another 3 or 4 on it. Go slow. Figure it out. Don't destroy the delta in the process. Don't destroy some of the richest, oldest agricultural land in America, or in California at least. There's an alternative. We're holding a deck of cards here in California. And in that deck, there are 5 aces. And there's also a joker. The joker is the present BDCP, a $25 to $50 billion bet that doesn't solve the problem of water reliability. And being looked at very carefully by the environmental agencies who are raising the question that it does not solve the environmental issues of the delta. Pick up those 5 aces. Pick up the ace of recycling. Pick up the ace of conservation. Pick up the ace of storage. Take the delta, small facility, repair the delta levees. And by the way, there's 500,000 people that depend upon those delta levees and much of the Northern California infrastructure. And pick up the ace of storage. There are 5 aces in this deck. What's the 6th ace? It's called wisdom. Apply wisdom to this. Put aside what you think has been the answer and look to a holistic solution, one that really does solve California's water problems for the next generation or 2, probably for the next 50 years. Can it be done? Oh, yeah. This isn't something I thought up. This is a plan that's been put forth by the California Department of Water Resources and ignored instead of playing with that joker, as they have for $300 million or more, and in a program that ultimately will not work. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about a different way of proceeding to solve California water problems. And I want to thank Orange County and your water agencies here for showing us how one of those cards can be played. And for the Metropolitan Water District, for showing what that other card, that other ace is. And that is you prepare for the drought by putting in place storage. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Thank you much for having the opportunity to come down here and meet with you all this morning. It's quite a crowd that you have here. And obviously, for those of you in the water business, you know this is a critical year that we're focused on what's the future of water in California. And for those of you not in the water business, you know that it's important to the economy in California. You'll hear later this morning on some of the panels about why water is the lifeblood of California. California has invested tens of billions of dollars over the years in its water supply system. We have the largest water supply system in the world, although the Chinese are making a run at California and trying to develop their own systems. But we have water supplies that start up in the northern part of the state. 2/3 of the water that falls in the state falls north of Sacramento. 2/3 of the water that's used in the state is used south of Sacramento. So the challenge that we've had as water managers over the past 150 years is what to do about that, and how do we make sure that water is delivered to where it needs to go. So in California, we've seen wet years, we've seen dry years. The last major drought back in the late 80s and the early 90s was a real wake-up call for Southern California. At that point in time, there were scenarios where parts of Southern California would be delivered zero water. Unfortunately, we're having zero water allocations this year, although we've recently had enough water to be able to up that to 5%. But the lesson that was learned back in the late 80s, early 90s was that you have to diversify your portfolio. And Southern California has major investments in storage, major investments in water recycling. And now the portfolio in Southern California is a lot stronger, a lot more diverse, many more cards in the deck, as the congressman mentioned. But I think all of you know that if we don't invest in our foundation, in our basic infrastructure, then those assets will be stranded. Let me give you a good example. In November and December of 2012, we had the wettest November and December on record. Oh, if we only had those months again. Those were good months for water supply. The reservoirs were filling up. What we had, though, in the Delta was a problem with the way that the species were distributed. So the Delta smelt, in part because of that rainfall and the turbidity that it generated, moved into the part of the Delta where we have the facilities to move water from the Delta to the 25 million people in California who depend on it, the 3 million acres of farmland. We were not able to use those facilities because the Delta smelt were in the vicinity of the pumps. We were taking more of them than we were allowed to according to our schedule. And we were looking at a situation where we were going to have to shut down the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project if we didn't do something. So what did we do? We reduced the pumping. We cut the amount of Delta smelt that we were collecting. And what happened? What happened was we were not able to use that storage that had been invested in. We were not able to supply the water that is the basis for the water that's recycled. You can't recycle water unless it's there to start with. So we had a problem that year. And it was not a problem of storage. It was not a problem of recycled water. It was not a problem of conservation. It was a problem with the basic link in the system that has not been upgraded. And that's what this is all about. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan is very simply a permit request for the most important component of the system that still needs to be upgraded, which is conveyance through the Delta. The director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who knows a lot more than I do about fish and wildlife resources, he says that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has had a change in the way that we move water through the Delta on their priority list since the 1960s. It's about time to do this, because the way we move water, the way we manage water in the Delta is not working. I think nobody would contest that. We've seen species decline, we've seen water quality problems, we have a basic lack of reliability. There could be storms, earthquakes that pose a risk to the way that water moves through the Delta. We have one pathway. It goes from the north to the south. And as you see on your tables here, that's a situation that we gamble with every year to be able to move water through the Delta. The regulations are very complex. We've gone through multiple requests this year for some flexibility in being able to manage water. Fortunately, the resource agencies were able to allow us to do so in the context of the regulations. But that's going to be more of a problem in the future. And what we're looking at is if we don't solve this problem of moving water differently in the Delta, we're going to see less and less water available for the uses in the state. And without that backbone supply, you're going to have to find a lot more expensive solutions. And those solutions themselves are going to be necessary to meet the demands that California is going to experience as the population grows from 34 million to 50 million. Those are the estimates over the next 30 years. What are we going to do about those people? Well, Metropolitan Water District and in Orange County, you've got some ideas about what you're going to do to meet that additional demand. You're going to use your portfolio here that you're developing to meet that, but you still need that basic supply. All of you in the water business know that. You that are not in the water business know that you want to maintain your investments. You want to not strand those assets, and you want to keep your system reliable. The only way to do that is to solve the problems in the Delta. The Peripheral Canal, how many of you remember that vote? I'm sure you voted the right way. That system, as proposed back in the early 1980s, did not have ecosystem restoration components. The capacity of that system was 22,000 cubic feet per second. That was more than the capacity of the pumps that we have in the Delta because we expected to bring water from the North Coast. Well, that's not going to happen. What we're proposing now, and we have made changes to it, probably most importantly in 2012, we downsized it from 15,000 cubic feet per second to 9,000 cubic feet per second to meet the fisheries recommendations. And that is a system that we think is going to be able to provide the reliability we need. It will be a dual conveyance system. We will continue to rely on the Delta for about half of the amount of water we deliver because we need those two locations so that if there are fish in the south part of the Delta that are going to be preventing us from moving water from that part of the Delta, then we can move it from the north part of the Delta and vice versa. But more importantly, I think if we don't solve the ecosystem problems in the Delta, then no matter what system you propose is not going to work. And I think most scientists in the Delta will acknowledge that there are multiple factors. One of the most important, and you'll probably hear about this today in one of the panels, is that food production in the Delta has been declining. And that's because the right combination of habitat, water quality, and fisheries resources are not there in the way that we need them. If you don't solve the problem of the channels in the Delta not being prime habitat, then no matter what you would do to invest in levees in the Delta, it's still not going to fix the problem. And you're not going to have that basic reliability that you need for that water supply that goes from the Delta. So that's what the BDCP includes as well. It's a conveyance facility, and it's a habitat restoration proposal. And it's exactly what's been required in the biological opinions by the very fisheries agencies who are going to be making the decision about this permit. It's building on that. They ask us to improve wetlands habitat. We've got a commitment to 8,000 acres of tidal habitat restoration. We're expanding that to 65,000 acres in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. We're going to be improving habitat along the channel margins, improving those levees while at the same time providing habitat. We're also going to be preserving agricultural uses in the Delta, 45,000 acres of easements on agricultural land to make sure that the benefits that that agriculture provides for cranes, for hawks, will continue. So it will be a change in the Delta, but there's going to be a change in the Delta anyway. Many of the lands are becoming unproductive because of seepage, because of levee instability. So over 50 years, which is what our proposal is, we will see changes in the Delta. What we'd like to do is make sure that those changes can happen in a way that are going to protect the species and provide the ecosystem restoration benefits that no one disputes are necessary to do. Department of Fish and Wildlife is our main partner in our current projects, and they think that we're not moving fast enough. And if you look at the status of the species, I think most biologists would say the same. So the choice is clear. We need to support our fundamental system that we have in place now, plus we need to do all the other things that Congressman Garamendi said. We don't disagree on that front. We need new storage, especially as the climate changes and we have less snowpack and more rainfall. We have to solve that problem. And groundwater storage is an important component of that. What we saw this year, though, was if you can't get water to that groundwater storage basin or out of that groundwater storage basin because you can't convey it, it doesn't do you any good. So that's a component, storage, recycling. When I was running the water district in Marin County, we had a small recycling facility, and I would have given anything to have a fabulous groundwater basin like you have down here that gives you that kind of flexibility to be able to manage water. But you have to have water to start with to be able to recycle it. So that's an important component. Conservation. This year, we're seeing tremendous investments in conservation. The city of Los Angeles has grown by millions of people, but their water use is less than it was back in the 1970s. So there's a strong track record around the state. I wish there were a stronger track record up in my neighborhood in Sacramento, but I'm killing my grass this year and putting in natives because I see all the beautiful landscaping you have down here in Southern California. If we did that more broadly in Northern California, then some of the issues that have come up this year would not be as prominent. But Southern California is leading the way on that front, but in California we have to make more of an investment to use our water wisely. But we still have to have water to use, and that's what the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is all about. We need that investment. If we don't get an investment, then we will likely have a catastrophe at some point in the future. That water supply would be cut off. 25 million people would not be able to turn their taps on because their water supply, some of the water districts in Southern California rely on the State Water Project for 100% of their supply. They would be in a difficult situation. We want to prevent that. As a reliable manager of a water system, when I was there in Marin County, the same thing, you need to make sure that your system is going to withstand all of the seismic challenges it faces, all of the environmental challenges it faces. And that's what the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is all about. We're doing something similar to what San Francisco is doing with their tunnel project to provide reliability for their system. Southern California, you've had tunnel projects as well to provide reliability. This is just another component in the overall statewide water system that is absolutely critical to do. Because if we don't solve that problem, then
Bond.
The alternatives that we have
James Bond.
would be to live and let die. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Congressman. I think in light of time, we'll be able to just ask one question from my standpoint, and then I think we're going to turn it over to a couple questions from the audience. So I'll start with you, Congressman. You have stated that the BDCP proposal has the potential to suck the river dry and destroy the largest delta estuary on the west coast of the Western Hemisphere. Can you please explain how that's possible for us, for me?
Simple math. Go back through the historic records of the water flow down the Sacramento River. And over the years, in the serious drought years, it's probably less than 9,000 for 6 months of the year. Average is somewhere between 12 and 18,000 cubic feet per second. You've created 2 tunnels. I was trying to figure out how high the ceiling is. I'm guessing it's about 25 feet. The tunnels are 40 feet in diameter. The tunnels have a capacity of 15,000 cubic feet per second. As was said by my colleague, the project was downsized from 15,000 cubic feet per second to 9,000 by eliminating one of the intakes. So you got 9,000. Well, in a drought year, when there's greed and need and money and politics, you push aside and you build that fourth intake. Now you have 15,000. So it's simple math. You take half of the year and you can take all the water. Won't happen because of the environmental protections, they say. Yet the United States Congress in the last 3 years has twice passed legislation that repealed the environmental protections for the Delta. All the federal environmental protections, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, gone. And in the first iteration of that legislation, pushed aside the California state constitution and all of the California environmental laws. It passed the House of Representatives by a significant margin. It was stopped in the Senate, thankfully. So the existential threat is the creation of the plumbing system. And as my colleague told you a moment ago, you got to do something. I agree. And what you need to do is to put those 5 aces on the table and spend your money wisely, unless there's an unending amount of money, which I'm telling you is not to be found at the federal level. And if it's at the state level, we'll find out. But for the $15 billion anticipated first bid on the construction project, you could do the following. Recycling in Southern California, 500,000 acre feet, maybe 1 million acre feet for a couple billion dollars. You could build the storage reservoirs that I described, every one of them, all of them. You could repair the Delta levees, which they intend to use, or not, and many of us fear the not. You could build a small facility, the 3,000 CFS facility. If you really want to save money, you'd use the Sacramento Deepwater Channel, which is half of the project already built. And you can do the conservation. And you still haven't come to $15 billion. It's an amount of wisdom here. The tunnel does not protect Southern California because in the drought, presumably you could not use it unless you were intending to destroy the Delta. That is, take all the water. You've built the system that could do it. There's an alternative. Those are the 5 aces that we could put on the table. And it's a winning bet.
Thank you. I think we're going to turn it over to a couple of questions from the audience. There are some microphones out there. If you can kind of take a look to see if you can look to the closest one. I think we'll have time for one question, so who will be the brave soul to ask a question? All right, looking pretty good so far. Oh, we do have one question over here.
Good morning, and thank you for wonderful talk. I learned quite a bit. I'm wondering if we, let's say, ignore the water that we have in Delta. Where should we go for water? I am guessing maybe desalination would be a good choice where there is endless supply of water next to California. Thank you.
That was an excellent question, and I think Congressman Garamendi has highlighted alternative water supplies as important, and they are. But the difficulty we have is that anybody that's looking at what sort of investments you want to make sure that your investments are as cost-effective as possible, and that you start with the ones that give you the best bang for the buck. So with desalination, for example, I think the costs are ranging from $1,500 an acre foot to $2,500 an acre foot. And so that's a pretty significant investment. What we're talking about in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is an incremental cost of somewhere on the order of $300 an acre foot. So that's your choice. If you have to replace all the water that you get from the delta with desalination, you're going to see your costs go up by, what, six times, 8 times, something like that. So that's going to take a lot of money, and I think your ratepayers might have some questions to ask about why you would do that. That doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't look at desalination or recycled water or other alternatives, because, as I said, we're going to need all those solutions as we look at growth in the future. We're not proposing to take any more water out of the delta than we do. In fact, it may be lower than the amount of water that's being delivered now. But what we need is reliability for that water, so that you can continue to rely on that water supply, so that as you see growth in demand happen, that you can meet that with some of these other alternatives that will be more expensive.
Desalination and recycling basically use the same technology. You'd want to go to the one that has the least impact, environmental, and the cheapest operating cost, and that would be your recycling. Certainly there's a potential for desalination out there. In fact, it's happening, and there'll be more of that in the future. Keep this in mind. The present plan for the BDCP does not create 1 gallon of new water. Not 1 gallon of new water. And it's just said it may not even be able to deliver more water than the present system. And it is extraordinarily expensive. There's an alternative that does create new water. Every gallon of water that you save is new water. Every gallon of water that you recycle is new water. Every gallon of water that you're able to store for the next drought is new water. That's where you want to go. You want a system that deals with the reality of the need to create new water. The BDCP has no storage, no money for the delta levees, no money for conservation, no money for recycling, and there is no place to put the water after it comes out of the tunnels, other than the existing reservoirs, which, by the way, in 2012 were full. At the end of the season, and there was water available, and there was no place to put it, and they turned the pumps off, not because of the delta smelt, but because there was no place to put the water.
James Bond.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Definitely wonderful presentations and learned a lot. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.